Good morning and welcome to today's briefing on the Smart Great Lakes Initiative. My name is Matt McKenna and I'm the director of the Great Lakes Washington program at the Northeast Midwest Institute. First, just a couple quick housekeeping items I wanted to get out of the way. Today's program is being recorded, so you will be able to access the content after the webinar has ended. We will also have time at the end of the program for questions, but in the meantime, please feel free to use the chat function in Zoom to relay any questions you might have for the panelists. Today, you will hear from a panel of experts about the Smart Great Lakes Initiative. This initiative seeks to advance technology applications that improve our understanding, use, conservation, and management of the Great Lakes. More specifically, you'll learn about the Smart Great Lakes Common Strategy Framework. This framework has been developed by a diverse group of stakeholders across private industry, states, provincial and federal governments, academic institutions, and nonprofit organizations throughout the US and Canada. But first, I'm very excited to introduce our first speaker, Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Congresswoman Dingell, who represents Michigan's 12th district and currently serves as a co-chair of the bipartisan Congressional Great Lakes Task Force, continues to be one of the great champions on federal freshwater policy here in DC. The Congresswoman serves both on the Energy and Commerce and Natural Resources Committee, where she continually advocates for policies that benefit the Great Lakes region. Thank you, Congresswoman, for joining us today.
Thank you, Matt. Good morning to everybody. And thanks for that very kind and warm introduction. And greetings from the heart of the Great Lakes region where it is 0 degrees. And it is cold. My kitchen's freezing. My office, my kitchen. But it's really great to be with all of you this morning to talk about what matters to all of us, our treasured Great Lakes. And I'm always honored to join the Great Lakes Observing System and the Northeast Midwest Institute. So they're inviting me to say a few words meant a lot. But I am going to be brief because, like all of you, I'm looking forward to hearing from this really distinguished panel of experts on new and innovative ways we can protect the Great Lakes for all future generations. As someone who spent her life growing up on these waters, I grew up on the St. Clair River. And not today, but most days, I still dream if you could let me escape, it would be in that inner tube out in the middle of the river floating down. Not today, but and it's a great privilege to represent Southeast Michigan in the Congress. And as serving as one of the co-chairs of the Great Lakes Task Force, we really have to make sure we continue to prioritize and protect the economic environmental health of the Great Lakes. These waters, Lake Huron, Lake Ontario, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, and Lake Superior serve as the economic, ecological, and cultural backbone of our 8-state, 2-province region. They comprise the largest surface freshwater system of the world, holding nearly 21% of the world's freshwater supply and 90%. I think so many people don't know that, 90% of the United States freshwater supply. They're the source of drinking water for over 30 million Americans. And they're also an economic driver that supports jobs, commerce, agriculture, transportation, and tourism for millions of people across this country. I'm really proud of the fact that through good bipartisan work, the Great Lakes have managed to be one space that stays bipartisan over the decades. We've been able to establish a range of different programs like the GLRI and appropriate significant funding for the Great Lakes Basin to help protect these great natural resources and address the challenges they face. These challenges have included invasive species, pollution, harmful algae blooms, to coastal resiliency, climate change. But more work and more investments are needed for the long term, since the Great Lakes region is largely underfunded compared to similar marine systems. I am proud of the fact that we got money for an ice cutter, which today I know we need more than usual. And I have seen, look, when I used to float down that river in the inner tube, the water was dirty. I mean, it really was. I've gone through periods, well, there are periods now we still can't eat fish that we catch. So sorry about that. So this really matters. So in order to fully understand and track these threats as policymakers, we need sound data to make informed policy decisions and craft effective legislation. So we're here today to learn about the work of the Smart Great Lakes Initiative and how we can bring data collection, monitoring, and sharing into the 21st century. So you're going to learn about today support for science, innovation, and new technology that will dramatically improve our ability to identify, assess, and respond to the stressors and how they change across the Great Lakes Basin, as well as the need to build out Great Lakes data systems that are adaptable, interoperable, and accessible to the public. So I don't want to get ahead of our great panel, so I'm going to leave it there. But thank you to all the congressional staffers that are joining this briefing today. I know how important you are. You're the ones that educate the bosses. My team is so important to me. So I hope you'll share what you learned today with your bosses. And you can reach out to my staff anytime if there's any future interest in working collaboratively. I'm hoping to introduce the Smart Great Lakes legislation by the end of the year, and we would welcome partners in this. So again, thanks to the Great Lakes Observing System one more time for all that you do for all of us. Love you in my district. And I look forward to the briefing and turning it back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We really appreciate your remarks. And obviously, we thank you for all the great work you do with the task force for the Great Lakes in Washington, D.C. To kick off our program, I'm really happy to introduce Kelly Page. Kelly is the current Chief Executive Officer of the Great Lakes Observing System, or otherwise known as GLOS. As a binational nonprofit, GLOS provides data services that support science, policy, and management throughout the Great Lakes region. GLOS serves as a certified regional association of NOAA's Integrated Ocean Observing System, also known as IOS. Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Matt. I'm going to just take a quick second here to share my screen. I'm presenting. Okay. Can everyone see my slides okay, Matt?
Yes, I can see you.
Okay, great. Thank you again, Matt. And thank you, Congresswoman Dingle. I mean, your remarks are so great and we really appreciate them. And I really am glad to have had this opportunity to organize this briefing with your office and with the Northeast Midwest Institute. We're so grateful and excited for this opportunity to share more about the Smart Great Lakes Initiative. To start, I'd like to provide some quick background on GLOS. We are a nonprofit organization, like Matt said, and we provide end-to-end data services to support science, policy, management, and industry in the US and Canada. We're funded primarily through a cooperative agreement with the Integrated Ocean Observing System, or IOS program, that's managed through NOAA to help fill data gaps, leverage and extend the existing network of observing assets, and support data sharing and integration solutions that make it easier for people to find and access the information they need about the Great Lakes. We've been helping people like scientists, recreational boaters, and drinking water utilities access data about the lakes for over 13 years. And we've seen some changing trends over time. For instance, through advances in science and technology, we have access to more data, more diverse data types, and larger data sets. And as a result, there's a greater demand for more complex data analysis. We've also seen a change in the way people interact with and consume data through smartphones and on-demand information applications. You know, individuals are just no longer satisfied visiting a website every day to learn about the conditions on the lake. They prefer to receive alerts and push notifications or explore applications on their mobile devices. And really, if you think about it, these trends that we've been noticing at GLOS are indicative of the broader way that smart technologies have transformed the way our society and the world interacts. You know, as smartphones and inexpensive sensors become more common, they allow us to collect far more data than we can currently use, and they really influence how we choose to search for, consume, and share information. We also see continuously changing technology advancements like distributed sensing, artificial intelligence, and machine learning. And these kinds of tools allow for that integration of data, diverse data, adaptive and predictive analysis, and automated control and interoperability. We see this advanced technology being used in so many other areas of our life. We have not been able to realize the full potential of these innovations in natural resource management. Furthermore, we know that the Great Lakes is being viewed by many as a potential climate refuge. And while in some ways that seems like a tremendous opportunity for our economy, it really begs the question, are our cities and surrounding communities adequately prepared for the greater demand and strain on our infrastructure and natural resources? We're already seeing accelerating changes across the Great Lakes, coastal erosion, algae blooms, and extreme weather that puts infrastructure and communities at risk. So how can we best take advantage of innovations in science and technology to help us better manage and prepare for the challenges of the future instead of just reacting to the emergency of the day? This notion of using advances in technology to make our environment smarter is what inspires the vision for Smart Great Lakes. Now, at GLOS, we saw that we had a role to play in helping realize this vision because our mission is focused on filling data gaps and supporting data management. But fully realizing Smart Great Lakes requires more than what we can do alone. So we set an ambitious goal in October 2019 when we released our strategic plan and the vision for Smart Great Lakes. And then we invited partners across the region to participate in developing a collaborative strategy to achieve Smart Great Lakes. We started with 2 founding partners who very early on shared this vision with us. And within a few months, the initiative grew to over 70 organizations representing the US and Canada in government, academia, private sector, nonprofits, et cetera. These partners organized around a shared understanding. We know that there is a need as well as opportunity. Many of the monitoring and IT resources available today have yet to be applied to the Great Lakes with the full weight of the region's collaborative spirit behind them. So a common strategy document was developed by this expansive and diverse range of partners to identify needs, goals, and strategies for advancing technology applications that can improve our understanding, management, and use of the Great Lakes. The partnership identified 10 common goals, and you can read about them in more detail online. I'm not going to go through the whole common strategy document on this webinar. But fundamentally, the document was a call to action for more investment in and collaboration around the infrastructure and human capital that's required for adequate data collection, data analysis, and data sharing. As you can probably imagine, there are already so many examples of programs and initiatives around the region that are helping to establish baseline data, identify information gaps, and accelerate our ability to assess and respond to emerging issues that face the Great Lakes. Specifically at GLOS, we're sponsoring an Indigenous-led Smart Great Lakes initiative to assess if and how this vision for Smart Great Lakes resonates with Indigenous communities across the basin. We hope to find ways to complement our use of advancing Western technology with traditional ecological knowledge and other community-based monitoring to ensure an inclusive and holistic approach to achieving Smart Great Lakes. We're also co-leading an effort called Lakebed 2030 with government, academic, and private sector partners to update the outdated and low-resolution bathymetric maps of the Great Lakes. Today, only 15% of the lake floor has been mapped at high density, and this leaves major information gaps that can impact navigation, fisheries, and sediment management, among other things. There are countless, it's really just too many regional, lake focus and topic focus efforts across the basin. And they're all working to expand monitoring coverage and advanced data analysis to inform management and policy needs. And we're going to hear more about some of them today. These programs are working hard, to stay coordinated and leverage what funding is available, but at the end of the day, more is needed. So to help us achieve Smart Great Lakes, we can use Congress's help. First, formally acknowledging the need for greater investment in Great Lakes monitoring, science, data management, and technology innovation by introducing and passing authorizing legislation to support the Smart Great Lakes initiative. That's the ultimate goal, that's the dream. Congress can also help by supporting appropriations appeals for funding increases where, we know we need to grow our existing capacity to address current data and information needs, as well as emerging needs discovered through our work in implementing Smart Great Lakes. And then we think it would also be helpful for Congress to request a report from the Great Lakes Interagency Task Force to help us identify how much funding is going to Great Lakes science and monitoring infrastructure now, including any potential increases that have come from the infrastructure bill. It'll help us assess how current science and monitoring capacity is being utilized to address regional management priorities, and then help us determine how much and where more targeted investment is needed to fill critical information gaps that can better prepare us for evolving management needs in the future. So I really thank everyone who participated or joined this meeting today. Thank you for your time and interest in Smart Great Lakes. Obviously, I think it's a great idea, but you probably think I'm biased, so don't take my word for it. We've got more perspectives to share, and you'll see for yourself the great reasons why we need to support more SMART programs in the Great Lakes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. That was a really great overview of GLOS and the work you're doing and engaged in. I think we might have to deviate a little bit from our original agenda. I think the next speaker now will be Commissioner Kim Dubucle. I think, hi, Commissioner. Sorry about the change in our schedule, but if it's okay, I'm going to give you a quick introduction and then maybe you can fill us in some of the work that you're engaged on. Commissioner Dubucle has been an elected member of the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District Board of Commissioners since November 2018. She also currently chairs their Federal Relations Committee. The commissioner has also previously served as a state representative in the Illinois General Assembly, and she's been strongly focused on increasing awareness of environmental justice issues, climate change, and preserving clean water in the greater Chicago area. Commissioner, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm just going to give a brief overview of what the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District does, and then a little bit on how I think we could increase our funding. So the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District, otherwise known as MWRD, was founded over 130 years ago as a public health agency to protect the Great Lakes, and specifically Lake Michigan, from wastewater entering our waterways. Lake Michigan provides, or the Great Lakes rather, provides 70% of the United States freshwater supply. And so what our agency does is we process waste and stormwater. And so instead of that waste and stormwater entering our waterways, we take it, we claim it, we clean it, we put it back into the Chicago River, and we send it down river so it does not enter our freshwater supply and our fresh drinking water supply. I want to talk a little bit about investment that MWRD has made in monitoring our Chicago River, which is helping the district and helping the Great Lakes. Through our partnership with a company called Current, H2 Now reports on the river like a meteorologist will report on the weather. It gives residents information to help determine when the river is safe to use and when we should stay away. A better understanding of these different segments helps us to make better informed decisions about how we interact with the river. H2 Now is at the forefront of testing new technologies to improve our understanding of the river. The H2 Now sensors also have an indicator of fecal matter at different points along the river, the three branches, the north, the south, and the main branch. Fecal matter pollutes the Chicago River in two main ways. First, rainwater falls over 1,800 square miles from Wisconsin to Indiana, and it drains into the Chicago River, carrying, among other things, droppings from birds and other animals. Second, heavy rain can occasionally overwhelm our local sewer system, which was constructed over 100 years ago before wastewater treatment processes existed. These events can cause harmful combined sewer overflow days, which means the wastewater goes directly into the Chicago River before we're able to process it. This innovative technology improves the quality of the water throughout our waterway system while protecting our region's freshwater supply, again, which is Lake Michigan. So why must Congress invest in smart Great Lakes technologies? We need to stay innovative and we must use the latest technologies. The latest technologies will allow governments to make proper investments in our infrastructure. For example, climate change is constantly evolving, and using our latest technologies will give decision makers the necessary resources and evidence on how global warming is impacting the Great Lakes. As I said earlier, the Great Lakes provide 70% of America's freshwater supply. However, the erosion that is occurring on the Great Lakes is washing away homes, destroying roads, and threatening critical infrastructure, such as water treatment plants and MWRD. Climate change is only going to make this worse. Therefore, investment in the latest technologies are crucial to give decision makers like us the best resources to make decisions that impact the watershed and our wonderful Great Lakes. Lastly, the 5 Great Lakes are a globally significant natural resource, and they are under constant pressure from urban sprawl, economic activity, habitat loss, and invasive species. And a rapidly changing climate using innovative technologies will allow us to protect and sustain our relationship with this vast ecosystem today and for the future. Therefore, it would be great if Congress could increase investment in technology and monitoring our Great Lakes so we can protect our precious jewel, the Great Lakes. It's such a valuable resource, and we need to protect it.
Thank you, Commissioner. We really appreciate your insights and all the work that you're doing in Chicago and the Great Lakes region. We really do appreciate it. Our next speaker that we have on tap is Joel Braumeyer. Joel is the president and CEO of the Alliance for the Great Lakes. The Alliance is a nonprofit working across the region to protect our most precious resource, the fresh and natural waters of the Great Lakes. Joel is extremely active in the Great Lakes community and serves on various boards and councils, including the Healing Our Waters Governance Board, the State of Michigan Invasive Species Council, and the Blue Accounting Advisory Committee. Thank you, Joel, for joining us today.
Thanks, Matt. Hello, everybody. Just give me a moment while I get my screen shared here. And Matt, can you see everything okay?
Yep, looks great, Joel.
Great. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see many of you virtually, and look forward to seeing folks in person as soon as possible again. I'm speaking to you today from my home in Chicago, which is the traditional homeland of the people of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa, and also speaking about the Great Lakes, which is the homelands of hundreds of tribal nations across the Great Lakes region in what is today the United States and Canada. I just wanted to say up front, I really appreciate in Kelly's comments the recognition in the common strategy of the importance of Indigenous knowledge and the work that Smart Great Lakes is doing to try to elevate the role of that knowledge and the data that it can create in this project. So I'm going to talk briefly about just my perspective on why the Smart Great Lakes Initiative is important and something that's worth your time and potentially funding. So 3 points to start. One is that many of you who work on this stuff every day here on Great Lakes issues know that not only have we seen in the last 10 years an unprecedented investment through the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, over the next 4 to 5 years, we're expecting even more. We've seen in the infrastructure bill last year a significant boost to Great Lakes restoration investment, and we're also seeing a steadily increasing authorization level over the next 4 years. This means that through the GLRI alone, we're going to see, I'm optimistic that we're going to see appropriations levels beyond anything that we've seen over the last 11 years. And that should be really encouraging because there's a lot of work to do. Many of you are familiar with the Areas of Concern program, which has been front and center in the GLRI. There's a lot of other projects that still need to get done to achieve our vision of a restored Great Lakes. And so that level of funding is great. We also know that it's really important to continue to monitor progress and understand how much success we are seeing in the region and to communicate that really clearly to the communities that depend on the Great Lakes. And I think Smart Great Lakes can play a role in improving how we do that. Another part of this project that I'm really excited about, and one of the reasons I got involved, is because of the emphasis and the interest in looking and focusing on community sourced and community controlled data. There are sources of data that can be converted to actionable information out there in the Great Lakes, coming from community organizations, from tribal nations, from municipalities, a whole variety of sources. And the opportunity here that I think SGLI is looking at is figuring out how to access more of that information, cultivate it, and really place the folks in communities that are creating that data in the lead on communicating it and making it actionable. And this goes to my last point, which is I'm excited by the prospect of connecting more database decisions to impacts on people's daily lives. As I'll talk about here in just a second, sometimes the big picture of Great Lakes restoration and Great Lakes health gets lost on whether or not we're actually seeing local impacts that are really felt by people on the ground in how they use the Great Lakes, whether that's for drinking water or for swimming or other forms of recreation, or any of the dozens of ways that people get their benefits from the Great Lakes. And so I think this project has the potential to connect that data in a more tangible way to people's daily lives. I want to mention, I know many of you are probably familiar with this table. This is from the 2019 binational assessment of Great Lakes restoration and ecosystem health. I raise this because it's in the Smart Great Lakes strategy. It's also in many other documents that cite it. And I'm bringing it up because I was fortunate enough to be part of what was a too-short conversation sometime last year that was convened by the National Wildlife Federation to talk about Great Lakes indicators. And like I said, it was a couple of hours of really informal chat. But what came out of that conversation for me was this recognition that many of the ways that we talk about Great Lakes health in this big regional scale, like we do in these binational reports, doesn't necessarily feel relevant to how people are experiencing the health of the Great Lakes in their community. And so, a good example of that on this table is the drinking water indicator. When we know that though we have access to lots of treated drinking water in the Great Lakes region, we know that there are a lot of drinking water challenges actually being experienced on the ground across the Great Lakes. There are other disconnects between regional indicators and people's experiences of the Great Lakes in their communities. And again, with that focus on bringing in monitoring and data from all sources from the community level on up, I think that Smart Great Lakes can make a contribution to making data more locally relevant, and also at the same time increasing communities and people's interest in the progress we're making on restoring the Great Lakes. And that's critically important as we continue to cultivate and build support for the movement for restored Great Lakes. I want to mention one specific local example. I've got quite a few that I can think of, but I just want to touch on something that's happening in a part of the Great Lakes where my organization, the Alliance for the Great Lakes, does a lot of work. That's Northeast Wisconsin, and this is a story from, as it says there, the Appleton Post-Crescent from 2019. With the headline, it's peak algae season in Wisconsin. Here's what you should know about the toxic stuff. And I put this up here because I think it just demonstrates, one, it's more than a little tragic that we are still dealing with the fact that our surface water can be toxic to the touch, toxic to contact for people and animals not just in 2019, but every summer, including the one that's coming up in 2022. It's also, though, an indicator of how normalized this issue has become, that we're seeing these sort of relatively standard headlines in media about we're in algae season and here's what you should know about the toxic stuff. This picture, in case you can't read the caption, is taken on a bridge going over a river running near Green Bay, running through the city of Green Bay. And so we're facing these challenges, not just in Lake Erie, not just in Green Bay, but this one in particular in surface waters across the Great Lakes region. And it's simply not okay that we have a situation where surface waters can actually be toxic to the touch. So in this example, where could Smart Great Lakes make a contribution to helping to solve this problem? There's already in this location an existing total maximum daily load that calls for a 60% phosphorus reduction by 2040. That's a big number, and it's going to have to come from big reductions from agriculture. So the good thing is there's extensive local buy-in and cost estimates for what it would take to get to this goal already in place. But there's a real need for forecasting how we get to clean water outcomes by making what are going to be some pretty significant landscape changes. And programs like Smart Great Lakes could make contributions to measuring how those, or forecasting how those outcomes could come about as a result of big investments that need to be made on the ground. And there's an opportunity here, again, going back to that point about community level data, to connect environmental metrics like the ones that we're very used to talking about to really important local health and economic goals and improvements that need to be built into our monitoring efforts in the Great Lakes. As we learn more and more about the impacts of polluted water on people's daily lives, it's so important to figure out how to align traditional knowledge, community data, health outcomes to our work of monitoring environmental progress. And this is a project that can make a contribution to helping us get there. The last thing I'm going to say is just reiterating some of Kelly's comments about the opportunities for Congress to help. Certainly considering introducing and authorizing legislation for the Smart Great Lakes Initiative and supporting future appropriations requests, and also considering commissioning a report to assess funding gaps. I know Kelly went through the details on that, but continuing to be really clear that the Great Lakes region needs further investment in monitoring and science to help us understand the progress we're making, and also make stronger connections of demonstrating how that progress is benefiting people across the Great Lakes region. So with that, I'll stop. I appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer questions as we go forward.
Great. Thank you, Joel. That was really informative. And again, thank you for the work that the Alliance does in the region. We really do appreciate it. Next, we have a final presentation, and then we'll open up for questions. But we have Dr. Val Klump, who is currently a professor and former dean of the School of Freshwater Sciences at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Dr. Klump is also a member of the International Joint Commission Science Advisory Board. He also serves on the Wisconsin Sea Grant Advisory Council. He's a member of EPA's Great Lakes Advisory Board. He's also a former member of the NOAA IOS Federal Advisory Committee. Thank you, Dr. Klump, for being with us today.
Yes, thank you. And can you see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Kelly, and thank you everyone for giving me an opportunity to say a few things this morning. I'll start off with showing these two images. One, of course, on the left is the Cuyahoga River in Cleveland, which notoriously caught on fire. And it wasn't the only time the Cuyahoga River caught on fire, and it wasn't the only river in the Great Lakes that's caught on fire. But this particular image made the cover of Time magazine, and is credited in part with the stimulus for passage of the Clean Water Act in 1972. And we have made enormous progress in the Great Lakes as a result of the passage of the Clean Water. I mean, our lakes, rivers, and streams are far cleaner today than they were 50 years ago. But we still face major challenges in this system. And that's shown on the right-hand side. As you may have seen, a massive algal bloom, cyanobacterial bloom, or blue-green algae, sometimes referred to, in the western end of Lake Erie. So despite their size, and this is 20% of the world's surface water, these are surprisingly fragile ecosystems. There are a number of reasons for that. One of them is evolutionarily speaking, they're relatively young, so their food chains are simple, and they're highly susceptible to invasion by non-native species. I'll mention that in a minute. And the other thing is the Great Lakes are essentially closed systems. So for example, water residence time in Lake Michigan is about 100 years. So for all intents and purposes, anything you throw, toss, leak, or otherwise get into the system stays there more or less indefinitely. I always tell people, I say, you throw it in today, there is a good chance you will drink it tomorrow or sometime in the not too distant future. And that's a characteristic of the Great Lakes, which is unusual. This supplies drinking water to tens of millions of people. The system has changed. Let's see, get my cursor on the right thing here. Dramatically in the last 20 years. I mean, the system looks much different today than it did 20, 30 years ago. And the science that we did 20, 30 years ago, while it's not that it is no longer relevant, but it is certainly not up to date. A best example of that is the invasion of dry-sinid mussels. Of course, they are voracious filter feeders and they increase water clarity in the system dramatically, to the point where Lake Superior, which is one of the most pristine lakes in the world, is now the third clearest lake in the Great Lakes. The offshore waters of both Lakes Michigan and Huron have higher water clarity than Lake Superior. And this has totally re-engineered the ecosystem. So it doesn't look at all like it did in the days of our youth. And there's more change on the way. Obviously, climate is going to have a big impact. Our region is projected to get anywhere from a few degrees to and maybe in excess of 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer. That's an enormous change. Daytime high temperatures over 100 degrees. We might see a week or more of those in our region. It's projected to get wetter. And that wetness, that precipitation is going to come in fewer but more intense rain events, precipitation events, maybe 50 to 100% increase. And it's those rain events that drive the loading that Joel was just talking about. 70 to 80% of the non-point source loading in these systems comes in those 10 to 15 days a year that it actually rains. Of course, this is going to have major changes for Great Lakes agriculture. We're concerned about microplastics, the whole issue of emerging contaminants, pharmaceuticals, things like PFAS, et cetera. We're seeing an increase in dead zones and hypereutrophic conditions in a variety of environments. But ultimately, I think one of the biggest changes is going to be in demographics. People are going to move back into the Great Lakes region. This is not going to be the Rust Belt any longer. And they're going to move here because of climate. They're going to move here primarily because of a sustainable long-term supply of clean, fresh water, but also for the quality of life and the jobs. All of these are highly dependent on a healthy Great Lakes ecosystem. And so here's our basic formula. You can't protect, restore, or manage an ecosystem unless you understand how it functions, how it works. Ultimately, what we'd like to do is predict the future, right? In order to do that, you have to have a model of the system, and that model must contain all of the relevant processes, all of the connections between various parts of the ecosystem. That's the job of basic science, but you also need the data. You need the data to back up those models, to verify and calibrate those models. That sort of trifecta of issues, informs policy, which eventually leads to the proper restoration, protection, and sustainability of the system. And these models are not simple. There are a lot of moving parts. And understanding the connections between all these little boxes is essential. And that requires basic research to do that. We also need the data. The Great Lakes, a very non-steady state system, a high degree of variability in what's happening. In order to pick out a trend, say like climate change, you have to have an adequate amount of data. You need to monitor the system at a high enough resolution in time and space in order to pick out a long-term trend from a system that's this noisy. We simply don't do that today. We are not monitoring this system adequately in time and space. And of course, that's the job, as Kelly and Joel have mentioned, the job of the Great Lakes Observing System of beginning to develop the backbone for those models, but we have a long way to go yet. I'm a member of the IJC's International Science Advisory Board, and for the last year and a half, we've been working on a decadal science plan for the Great Lakes. This is modeled after similar plans that have been done in the oceans, but to my knowledge, and certainly in my lifetime, there's been no comprehensive decadal scale science plan developed for the Great Lakes. And it's way overdue. The two fundamental questions that science will answer is, what will the future bring, and how will we respond to it? A good example of that's the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. We are conservatively going to probably invest at least $20 billion and maybe more over the next 20 to 30 years to restore the Great Lakes. We need to know how the system functions so that the actions that we take are both effective in terms of getting an improvement, they're long lasting, so these improvements are permanent, and we can do it in the most cost effective way. The way you can do that is if you understand how this system functions. A number of draft priorities I think that will come out in this plan, which by the way, we expect will come out with a final draft here in the next month or two. Climate change obviously is a huge impact on the Great Lakes. Freshwater hydrologic systems are among the most sensitive on the planet to climate, and the Great Lakes are no exception to that. Our water levels, for example, are totally driven by climate. It's the amount of precipitation and evaporation that occurs in this system. Winter dynamics is a major gap. Most of our data systems go dark in the winter. We simply don't have the assets or the capacity to get out in the winter, so we know very little what's going on in the winter time. impacts of harmful algal blooms, dead zones, nuisance algae, changes in the food chain, emerging contaminants, a whole host of issues for which are, we have very little information on the level that we need to. And the application of modern scientific techniques and technologies, things like remote sensing and autonomous platforms, advances in genomics and other omics, artificial intelligence, big data, et cetera. All of these tools are now available to us. It can be applied. And I really think it will usher in a renaissance in Great Lakes science, and it's essential we take advantage of what we have available. Lake-related needs for underserved groups is an important issue that has gotten overlooked, I think, in the past. And of course, quantifying ecosystem services. So we know the value of what we are doing and can articulate that value and preserve and protect and manage the system. In terms of proposed investment priorities, I think the plan will come out with the first and foremost in my mind is, boost funding for basic fundamental research in support of ecosystem health and resilience, so that we have peer-reviewed research that is use-driven and management relevant. That's a key element. Foster a workforce. Now, I've spent my entire career on the Great Lakes, and I'll have to say that I see fewer and fewer young people going into Great Lakes science and water in general. And water is the fastest growing sector of the world economy right now. It's projected to reach $800 billion a year within the next 10 to 15 years. And I've had companies in Wisconsin, where I'm from, say we simply can't get enough well-trained people in this field to fuel the needs for our employment. And of course, address critical gaps, for example, like winter. And of course, a key to this is develop and implement research and monitoring infrastructure. The whole Smart Great Lakes initiative is a key. And finally, one of the other recommendations I think will come out of this report is establish a number of center of excellence. This is a highly interdisciplinary undertaking. It requires the talents of lots of different people in different disciplines. And so creating centers of excellence, whether those are virtual or real, it will be an important, I think, aspect of it when we go forward. And this is my last slide. And these two reports are fairly old now, but I think the message is still relevant today. And that is, it makes economic sense. These reports estimated that at the time, conservatively, if a $20 billion investment in Great Lakes research or Great Lakes restoration would return anywhere from $50 to $80 billion in value to the system. And I think that still applies today. That hasn't changed. They say that you don't inherit the environment from your ancestors, you borrow it from your children. And I think that's absolutely true. And especially in this case, we have a debt here on this system that we need to pay off. So we don't pass it on to our children and their children's children. This is, by some accounts, David could back me up on this, the third largest economy in the world, and by some accounts, it's $6 trillion a year. So it's not like we can't afford to do this. In my view, we can, for sure. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't. So with that, thank you.
Thank you, Val. That was a terrific presentation. We really appreciate it. I think now we can open it up for questions. Just so the audience is aware, we do have a hand raising function. If you go to the reactions button in Zoom, you'll see a button to raise your hand. And if you're able to raise your hand, I can call on you. I did see one comment in the chat. Actually, now I see two. Oh, I see. Yeah. The Commissioner, yes, we will. I will work on I'll work with Kelly to get the slides out for all the attendees. And then Drew Wade, I see, commented, this screams a DeFi project as water is the most precious and vital resources. I think DeFi is decentralized finance. So I don't know if any of the presenters or panelists wanted to comment on that. I do see another question that just popped up too. First, I'll see if anyone has any comments so far. All right. I've got a question here. Is there a role for Congress or others to play in encouraging greater investment from Canada, federally or provincially, which tends to be significantly less than what the US has been willing to invest?
I mean, I can make a small comment on that, and that is, I know there is a joint effort between the National Science Foundation and the National Research Council of Canada for a joint projects on, and now it's not on Great Lakes science, but it's on artificial intelligence and convergence research, I think. But that is a model for, I think, would be relevant for certain for Great Lakes research as well.
Yeah, and that's part of, the motivation behind the Smart Great Lakes Initiative and making sure that it's, got binational representation. I'm one of the co-chairs of the initiative, but we also have a Canadian co-chair and many Canadians who are part of the governance of the initiative. And so, just as we're making presentations and trying to spread awareness about Smart Great Lakes on the US side, we're helping them make those inroads on the Canadian side as well.
Something that's, I know that has happened here and there in the past is exchanges between Canadian MPs and members of Congress. And that would be something to consider for the future, is how to facilitate a conversation among some of the dedicated members of Congress who are champions for the Great Lakes with some of their counterparts in Canada, and then potentially jointly communicate those needs to the executives in both countries. That's something to think about. There's certainly other channels for that, but certainly those conversations are something that members of Congress could get involved in.
Sure. Thanks. I see Robert Burns, you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Hi, I'm Robert Burns. I'm with the Friends of the Detroit River. I'm actually one of Congresswoman Debbie Dingell's constituents, and I don't think she's on the web here now, but I really want to reiterate how much we appreciate all she's done as far as bringing Great Lakes Restoration Initiative money and now the infrastructure money that'll be coming and has come into the Great Lakes. Joel had mentioned the area concerns. There are 43 in the Great Lakes. The Detroit River is one of them. Our organization is actually responsible for implementing the Detroit remediation plan that's working to address the issues in the Detroit River. A couple of the big factors we're working on is sediment remediation and habitat restoration. And to talk about some of the things Kelly mentioned earlier about how important not only real-time data, but predictive and modeling data is to the work we do. I'll give you an example. We started doing our habitat restoration design work back in around 2011, 2012, 2013. Remember back in that time, the water levels in the Great Lakes were hitting a all-time low. They were very low. There was actually communities around the Great Lakes that were looking for getting funding to do navigational dredging to keep their harbors open. Well, we were just doing our design and basing our design plans for the habitat restoration projects we're doing, where the elevations are critical on where different habitat features are placed. We're going to determine how well they function in the future. And all we have to go by is historical data that's provided to us and has been for over 100 years from NOAA and Corps of Engineers, giving us what we can expect high and low waters to be. Well, we did our design work and then started implementing our plans and our projects and starting to do the actual construction starting in 2017, 18. And little did we know by 2019, 2020, as we're still building some of these projects, that the water levels in the Detroit River and around the Great Lakes were going to reach some heights that we've never seen before. So having some predictive data abilities certainly would have helped us in kind of determining, what we would expect to see in the future, when all we really have is what basically we've seen in the past. So getting back to what Kelly is doing, I think, again, real-time data for day-to-day activity, but also predictive data for the future is really going to help, because we're pouring millions of dollars into these projects, not only in the Detroit area, but around the Great Lakes, and to be able to understand what we can expect in the future that we can't look back in the past to determine is something critical. And I think with emerging things we've got going on with PFAS and say pharmaceuticals and waste streams and things like microplastics and things like that, those are all emerging contaminants of concern that data gathering and dissemination is going to be critical for us to kind of keep track on that in our area.
Thank you, Robert. I don't know if any of the panelists want to just chime in, or we can move to the next question. I see Dave's got, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
I was just going to say, I don't have anything to say other than thank you for sharing that perspective. I think it's really important to help people understand, you can talk about data and prediction and all that kind of stuff in general, but having that on the ground example is really beneficial. So thank you for sharing that perspective.
Dave Ulrich, I see you with your hand up. It's good to see you too. Long time.
Thank you. Good to see you, Matt. And I guess it wouldn't be a Great Lakes gathering if I didn't have a question and comment. First of all, thank you, Matt, and all of the speakers for the continuing excellent work that is being done on the Great Lakes. I sleep better as a result of it. I want to tap into, in particular, some of Joel and Val's comments. Joel talked about the critical importance of being able to speak to the broader public, elected officials around the critical indicators in a way that really is understandable. And we can collect all of the data in the world and create all of the models in the world, but if we cannot communicate the results of those ultimately to policymakers, we're just never going to make it. So I think many of you know I spent a lot of my career working on getting from close to 500 indicators down to the 14 that the fewest that tell us the most. And I'm really pleased to see that those are being used as communication tools, and there is the data behind it to support the conclusions that are reached. Val, your comments on the the importance of the research and the data to support it, for those of us who are mere mortals and not scientists, I support it wholeheartedly. But in the variety of capacities I've served, there has been a continuing frustration at the senior management and policy level as to how that research translates into real changes on the Great Lakes. So believe it or not, I have a question, and that is under goal 10 related to communication. And I'll ask all of the speakers to address this. What is going to be done differently so that there is better communication of all of this excellent science and research that is going on in the Great Lakes? Val, I'll put you on the spot first to tackle it, and then maybe Kelly after that, and Joel, if you want to chime in, that would be great. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, David. Yeah, no, it's a great point, David. And actually, I sit on the Great Lakes Advisory Board for EPA, and that's one of the principal issues that the GLAB is dealing with right now, is how to better communicate the importance of restoration and the impact of restoration in the system. You're right. It can't be a bunch of nerdy scientists like me necessarily don't have the skills to communicate this thing, but it is important, and it's important for the public to have realistic expectations. We screwed this system up over 100 years, and the fix is not going to happen tomorrow. I feel like the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, we're looking at it, 20 to 30 year effort. And personally, I think we should set a timeline. We should set a date. We're going to restore the Great Lakes by X time. And we said we'd put a man on the moon in 10 years, and we did it. We could do this in a certain period of time. That does a couple of things. One, it puts a little bit of a sense of urgency and let's get this done. And it also says to us, well, what are we going to have to do to make that happen? And that's an important message to send to the public. With respect to the earlier question about lake levels, this is a good example. What are the lake levels going to do? Well, so far, climate scientists are telling us, actually, we're going to see higher highs and lower lows. So it's the worst of both worlds, if you will. The variability in the system is likely to increase. That's an important thing to know if you're building infrastructure that you want to last for 50, 60 years. So yeah, I agree with you, David. It's a very important issue. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's one of the reasons why GLOS is so focused on trying to take advantage of some of these like IT advances and tools that are available to us. being able to, display the data, communicate the data, share the data in ways that meet people where they're at is really important, and more investment needs to be made in taking better advantage of these tools and resources that are available. We can do more complex data analysis. We can, get data to people, in a way that's easy for them to consume. We just haven't been able to, invest what's needed to make that happen. So I think the more that we're able to be successful in sharing data and making that information available, the easier it will be to also communicate some of these more complex science and management needs that exist. But, we've got to start somewhere.
If I could, I'd like to just take this opportunity to kind of respond to Dave's question and also bring in a question from Liz Kirkwood that's in the chat about the federal water infrastructure investments. That to me is the water infrastructure investments, which I consider part of Great Lakes restoration. To me, that's a great example of this need to show how the work that's being done is connecting to impacts in people's daily lives. I mean, there is often that story is told in terms of hundreds of billions. Like those are the words that are used to describe what the need is, but not so much in terms of, this block, this neighborhood needs to have flood relief. This neighborhood needs safer drinking water. And I do think there's an opportunity here to think about how do you use some of the tools that SGLI is putting forward to make that connection better, to tell that story about when this investment happens over time. You can forecast that you're going to see reduced flood risk. You're going to see improved drinking water safety outcomes. I don't want to overpromise because I'm not a principal on the project, but I do think that, just in Liz's question, I'm thinking about, boy, there's an opportunity there to change that conversation from talking about how much money needs to be invested into what are the clean water outcomes that neighborhood is going to experience as a result over time. And that I think that could be really exciting.
Matt, if I might just respond briefly to something Val said, and I really am happy you're on the Great Lakes Advisory Board. As you may recall, I used to chair that when it was unceremoniously allowed to die in place, but it's been reactivated. So make the most of it there. Joel, I think it was you who mentioned the importance of getting the members of Congress and members of Parliament together. I think you know that the city's initiative has been really working hard on trying to make that happen. And I think support from the broader Great Lakes community to do that will really, really be helpful. So very good. Thanks.
Terrific. I see Bill Kurtz's hand is up as well. Bill? I think you're still on mute, Bill. Yeah, Bill, I think you're still on mute, actually.
Okay, I'm Bill Kurtz, Relational Watershed Council up in the northern part of Lake Huron. To better understand this process, I'd like to know who's actually doing the modeling that we feed this data into. Is it a central coordinated effort, or are there 1,000 different people around the Great Lakes doing modeling without coordination?
Well, I can take a stab at that, Bill. I wish there were 1,000 people, even if they weren't coordinated, but there aren't that many for sure. I would say that the principal modeling framework that we have today is twofold. One is the Great Lakes forecasting system out of GLERO, which is basically a physical model of the Great Lakes, which is terrific. And actually the Great Lakes modeling community and the physics has probably led the country in that type of modeling. And some of the ecosystem modeling, which is being done in the Lake Erie system. But we could do a lot more. There just aren't enough people. There's not enough effort. And I think one of the recommendations that'll come out of this science plan is to do exactly what you're suggesting. And that is to have some entity which is responsible for archiving and hosting these models so that they're available to managers, so that managers can actually take these models and say, if I do this on the landscape, if I reduce agricultural loading by 20% in this part of the watershed, what impact will that have on the downstream ecosystem? That's where we need to do. We have the ability to do that, but we haven't implemented it yet.
Thanks.
I see Erica Jensen has her hand up as well. Hi, Erica. How are you today?
Good morning, Matt. Thank you. Hi, Erica Jensen with the Great Lakes Commission. And I just wanted to follow up on the conversation we just had around, communicating progress and understanding the data that we're collecting. And I want to offer that I think there is a role here for initiative that the Commission's been working on with Blue Accounting to help take all of the great data and observations from these investments in the science and research that's being done and combine that with what strategies, policies, approaches our states and provinces and partners around the region are taking to address Great Lakes restoration priorities. And so taking that data and combining it with these other efforts to provide the full picture of how we're doing on Great Lakes restoration and making progress towards some of these outcomes, and then provide that feedback loop to identify where there are data gaps and more information that could be collected to verify that these strategies, policies, practices we have in place that everybody is implementing across the landscape and across our jurisdictions are actually working and making progress towards those outcomes. So I see a real connection here between the investments needed and that would be made on behalf of GLOS and the Smart Great Lakes Initiative and some of our science priorities in tying that to the work we're doing in Blue Accounting to provide that big picture.
Thank you, Erica. I want to make sure any of the panelists want to chime in on that. I know we are hitting our 11 o'clock stop time. So if there are no more comments, I'm happy to close out. And first off, thank our panelists and thank Congresswoman Dingell for joining us today. We really appreciate hearing from all of you and all of the work that your organizations are engaged on in the Great Lakes region. I look forward to getting to work with all of your organizations, with the Congressional Great Lakes Task Force and all other Great Lakes community members and trying to forge ahead with future legislation to really codify and make this Great Lakes, Smart Great Lakes Initiative as strong as it possibly can be. So that being said, I will work on with GLOS getting the recording of this presentation and all the actual slideshows to all the participants, and we'll work on making sure that people that weren't able to attend can actually revisit and watch and learn about this really terrific initiative that's moving forward. So thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Bye.
Bye-bye.